Excellent, excellent. But yeah, we're excited to do this one, Jim, to lend your expertise here, help us close some deals and get some listings right now. Sell some real estate. It's not easy right now out in the market, as we all know. Luckily, I'm still working with some buyers. I got some listings out there, but excited to host the show with you, Jim. So let's get the party started.
Carmen, welcome, Carmen and Wendy. All right, so personal intros. You know me, you know Ryan. Most important thing, let's see. I'm gonna make a shameless plug for a second. Crossing for cystic fibrosis. If you guys are not involved, if you haven't given, can you see the crossing, Ryan?
Yep.
If you're not involved, if you haven't given, now's the time to give and get involved. This is such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful cause, organization, the people. You know, you hear so many different organizations, they have a little chink in their armor. And so you find out something late in the game and it causes you a little bit of angst. I've been with the Crossing for Cystic Fibrosis for almost 10 years now. It just keeps getting better and stronger, and we raise more money. We're the single biggest donor to the cause on the globe. It's a wonderful event.
Wow.
You can go there, you can give. We're the longest running team on the series. Props to
How many
ourselves.
years? How many years have you been doing it, Jim?
This will be the 8th crossing. It'll be my
Wow.
9th crossing. It'll be my 8th year on the official crossings. We did one on official crossing, and we're having the return of Shannon Lockhart, past female champion. She is a force to be reckoned with. I call her Tenacious Shannon. She is so relentless in her pursuit. I'm going to leave that up when we talk about the rest of this stuff. Title advance, it just keeps getting better and better, and I get more and more calls from agents how it saved their deal. Like and subscribe. Our closing cost calculator is updated for all the latest and greatest tools. I'm still not finding on other people's closing cost calculators for buyers nets and sellers nets and credits and all those little things you have to do. My goal, what's my goal? My goal is to tell you guys stuff you won't hear anyplace else. I've sat in a lot of different webinars and meetings on the same topics that we're going to cover today, but I'm going to give you a unique slant you won't get anyplace else. There are no dumb questions. You can always text me 24/7. You can go to newpathtitle.com, collect on 24/7 attorney support. And you can put anything you want to put in the chat. We have a small group. I'm happy to keep it informal. If you turn on your camera and I can see your faces, I can gauge your responses and move through material quicker. And that's it. Anything you want to talk about in the future, text me. Only a couple people ever do. I'd love to hear from you guys more. All right, without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it. Can you see the closing checklist, Ryan?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, so smooth closing starts before the listing, aka I'm going to give you a listing checklist. Today's June 2nd, 2025. Make sure your closing is as time efficient as possible. It starts with a great checklist, and if you're a buyer's agent, you should do the same homework when you're offering. I'm going to pause right there. I mean, that's the secret is in getting ahead of the ball. The 30 minutes it will take will save you hours and lots of money. Please text me 24/7 with any questions. I'm terrible at email. I apologize ahead of time. Please go to newpathtitle.com, click on 24/7 attorney support. And if you like the way we work, you can paragraph 20, you can click the closing agent. We'll save you time on deals. You don't have to shift any costs. Just have the people pay who always pay in the county you're in. And the benefit is you'll get to work with me. So you can leave it on the seller, even if you're representing the buyer, and you can have the buyer choose title. And it's not, you're not breaking any rules or anything. If you have not done so already, now is a great time to send a mass email to all the potential buyers in your database. When no one is buying, it's time to buy. That's the message. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And we all know what happens to inventory over the summer. And I think it's a great message to get ahead of the ball with regard to the buying population. Everybody's thinking vacations, everybody's thinking time off or whatever. Now's the time to be in buyers' ears. All right, I'm going to do something every week a little bit. We're going to call it Market Brief. And We're going to talk a little bit about local and macro driving forces in the real estate world. So the U.S. economy GDP shrunk for the first quarter of 2025 at an annual rate of 0.2%. This follows a 2.4% decrease in the fourth quarter of 2024. I mean, an
Increase.
increase.
Yeah.
So 3 is the ideal number for a healthy economy, and now we're looking at a shrinking economy, and so 2.4 goes down to 2.2, and that gives you a general idea of what's going on with consumers. Job openings fell 7 million in the lowest level since September 2024. The lowest level since September 2024, but the unemployment rate remains steady at 4.2. That's the thing that's going to break the interest rates backs finally, is going to be this unemployment rate, and it's just remaining constant, but it's starting to fall. And when the employment numbers start to deteriorate, that's when you're going to see better interest rates coming. In the first quarter of 2025, personal consumption expenditure increased just a little bit over the previous quarter, but that's the slowest growth rate in nearly 2 years. And this potentially means we're weakening consumer confidence. However, the pessimism hasn't translated into a significant decrease in consumer spending. So people are still spending, just not at the same rate. Now the good news. The annual inflation rate in the US eased to 2.3% in April 2025, down from 2.4% in March, below the forecast of 2.4. So that's a good sign. Overall inflation appears to be on a downward trend, gradually moving closer to the Federal Reserve's 2% target through core inflation, although core inflation remains somewhat elevated. Economic forecasts suggest US real GDP growth of 1.6 in 2025, down from 2.8 in 2024, and 3% is the ideal. So we're not looking at great opportunities for expansive economies, but the potential impacts from tariffs are expected to further hurt the economy. What does that mean to us? Advertise to your buyers. Now is the time to buy. Everybody can't buy, but the people who can buy that have been sitting on the sidelines, now's the time to get them involved.
I mean, I'll just put a story in. I just last week put a deal under contract at Flagler Point on a condo, small condo, personal friend of mine that reached out, and she actually got it less, Jim, than the current owner paid for it 3 years ago.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible? I mean, it
I
was a
mean,
little bit of a distressed situation. You know, they're going through a divorce, but luckily they had put a lot of money down when they purchased it. So they have equity, you know, there's equity there. They did have a loan, but they put a lot of money down. So there's
the
definitely
reality
opportunity.
is, you know, in deteriorating economies, more people aren't getting along, and more people are divorcing, and there are more people looking and relocating for new jobs, and all those little things that happen when there are economic shifts, and people have to get out of their big houses and get into little houses, and we're selling Airbnbs where people had all these crazy ROIs, and the ROIs aren't meeting the expectations, and maybe they bought the house with crypto money or some inflated, you know, asset, and now they're selling it, and it really doesn't hurt them. You know, it's hard to imagine. We did one where we not too long ago, they bought for $1 million and they're selling for 600 grand. And you know what they said? No hard feelings, time to move on. That the million was free money anyways. You just never know. You got to dig in, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the main
Awesome.
topic today is the listing checklist. You need 4 things to win the listing and coast to closing. You need to prepare your 3 M's. We'll go over in a minute. You got to prepare a seller net sheet, obviously. You got to get a title advance, and I'm going to give you the listing checklist. What are the 3 M's? Market analysis, marketing plan, and motivation. Why is the seller selling? You guys are the experts on marketing. Keep it brief, colorful, and focused on the seller's motivation. I hear this more and more. I listen to a lot of role plays between agents. And the agents that are very productive and continue to be productive in these markets, they know the motivation of the seller. They know the motivation of the buyer, and they drill down on that motivation with everything they tell them because they want to focus on their core principles. Very, very, very important. I hear agents that aren't as sophisticated talking all the time about the market and the analysis and the numbers and the data. Sellers are moving for a reason. The great one I heard the other day was the sellers wanted to get on with their retirement plan, buy an RV, get out of Dodge. The money was important, but the money wasn't the main factor. The main factor was lifestyle. And the agent was doubling down on money, 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 money. And all the seller really wanted was to get their RV and start moving on. And they could use that as part of the narrative when they were discussing price. And I love the line from Zillow because I get it all the time. Buyers call me and they say, well, Zillow, and we've talked about the disconnect between affected condos and unaffected condos. So the algorithm for the affected condos are the condos that have the big price impacts due to the heavy duty Sears reports that are driving the values down in those impacted buildings, but that's driving the values down in the unimpacted buildings.
Yeah.
So you've got
Yeah,
all
the
kinds of,
algorithm can't tell the difference.
they can't tell the difference. So I heard a great line. If Zillow couldn't get it, the values right for their own buying model, what makes you think that they could get it right for yours?
That's true. Well, they had like Open Door, right? They were buying properties as investments and flipping them, relying heavily on their algorithm, right, to
Yeah,
price properties out, and it didn't work. It blew up.
it
Yep.
went out of business. So if they couldn't do it for them, what makes you think they can do it for you? And now's the time as an agent to distinguish yourself. But unfortunately, that is a big part of buyers' motivation. So you got to know our buyers' expectation. So you got to know all of it. Seller's net sheet. Go to newpathtitle.com, click on the calculator symbol at the top of the page, print it up, a few scenarios. Everybody does that. Title advance. I can't stress enough. Go to www.titleadvance.io, enter an address, and you'll receive a summary title report within a short time, usually a couple of hours. Title advance will show you the liens, the mortgages, the encumbrances, the judgments that will have to all be paid off at closing. If title is clean, you can tell your seller the runway is good for a quick closing. But if title is clouded with code enforcement lien or an open permit or something that has to be taken care of before closing, you can literally know at the listing appointment. And you don't want to necessarily have these conversations before the listing agreement's signed, but certainly you want to tell enough to distinguish yourself from the other 3 or 4 listing agents that the sellers have interviewed. And you want to be top of mind when they go to bed thinking, Australia showed up and she had the title advance and she really knew what she was talking about. This is the agent we're going to go with. And that's the stuff that, those are the value propositions that you want to drop in your client's lap at the key times. Your title advance will also contain a search of the municipal records, revealing open permits, code violations, and similar events that have not yet been made into the public record. Please note, not all municipalities make their records available online. Big thing to remember. I hear this incorrectly relayed frequently. There are 2 repositories that hold data affecting the closing. There's the public record where deeds, mortgages, and all those great things go, and judgments. And there's the municipal record. Municipal record is where the violations go. The only record liens show up in the public record, but liens on real property only show up in the public record. They don't show up in the municipal record. A lien is not a lien until a fine is imposed, and a fine is not imposed until the issue has lingered for a while and a judge or a special magistrate holds a hearing and gives an order and it is recorded. Before then, that title defect is only listed in the municipal records. In the title industry, we call those muni liens and muni lien reports. So you have this file sitting on some code inspector's desk, and it says the grass has been tall and it's got to be dealt with before the closing, but it's not a lien. It's not a lien until a judge hears about it, has a hearing, and makes a rule that a fine is going to be imposed on a daily basis. Until then, it's just something that sits in the municipal record. And so agents, it's incumbent on you guys to read those municipal lien searches. They come to you in Title Leap, you get the ping in the email, you make 1 click, it takes literally 2 minutes to thumb through it on your phone. And then you'll know. I cannot tell you the vast majority of agents do not read that stuff, and it's there at their fingertips, and it's a huge asset for you.
Yeah.
Very important to remember, liens are a seller duty to clear, and they're on title, and it's talked about, and that's a title agent issue. Open permits, unpermitted work, and code violations are not title issues. They're seller's duty and buyer's duty and contract issues, and the buyers and sellers usually dump these on the realtor to resolve. I talked to a ton of realtors who wrongly assume these are seller duties. Read your contract. Text me 24/7. So
Yeah.
you got to know who's responsible first in the contract to clear this stuff up. And then you got to know, is it a title agent duty or is it the client duty? So when I say you got to know who, is it a buyer duty or a seller duty on permits and code violations and things like that? And then you got to figure out whether it's going to be remedied in title. It's only going to be remedied in title if it's in the title commitment. If it's in the muni lien search report, it's going to be a duty of the parties. And we all know the parties point to the agent and say, fix it. and people are, it's just an unfortunate reality. Buyers and sellers are getting a little more brazen with how they handle their agents. There's a lot of YouTube and social media content circulating where people aren't treating buyers agents and sellers agents with the respect they used to. And I'm sure you guys see it firsthand in the street. It's just a reality of modern day life.
Yeah.
Hey,
I was just
Jim, but you know the easy solution for that, right?
What is that?
On every buyer's contract that I write a clause that the seller shall cure all open permits, violations, the whole gamut. I have a clause that I
Yeah.
already have it, set up in the system. And then there's no, and always to cure it prior to closing.
Yeah. At the
And
seller's expense. Yep.
yeah, and problem solved.
paragraph 20.
I
Yeah.
actually represent, we have some magic contract language that we use, and there are some municipalities that start talking about different types of permits besides open and closed and pending. And so they've got so we've tried to incorporate all that language into the clause that we use, and I'm happy to share it with you. But it's funny, the other day I had a agent, they go on autopilot, the transaction coordinator goes on autopilot, and they were working with the seller, and they included that language about the seller closing all the permits in the contract. And so when the deal started to somewhat implode, the seller got down on their agent, and they said, why did you put that in the contract? We could have made that all buyer costs. And they just were not paying attention. So funny anecdotal story. All right, there are two parts of the listing checklist: the stuff you do before the closing and the stuff you do after the closing. The stuff that you do before the closing is salesy and schmoozing and earning confidence and all those great things. The stuff you do after the closing, those are the harder answer questions to answer. You want to make sure you got that listing agreement signed before you start asking the post-signing stuff. I'm sorry, I think I said closing. So there's the stuff you do before you get the listing appointment agreement signed, and the stuff you do after you get the listing agreement signed. Before you get the listing agreement signed, we're going to go a little bit in the weeds here. Ryan, fasten your seatbelt.
Let's do it.
Know your property. It takes 15 minutes. Look at the property appraiser's website. Review the last deed. Who's named on title? Don't just look at the print out on the website. So you got the property appraiser's website. Take a second and look at the deed. They do vary. Who must sign? The goal is to lock in the listing and get a signature from whoever is at the listing appointment. But ultimately, you will need everyone named on the deed to sign the listing agreement, contract, and closing docs. Here's a link to the law and rules on who must sign. So I gave you a little link here. It's another podcast we did on just who must sign, but it's all there for you guys. So if you
I want to let everybody know too, Jim, real quick. Everybody will be emailed this outline in the recording after the show, so we'll have that. So they'll have
special benefit for attending the podcast.
Yeah.
All right, married, single, corporate entity, or trust. Who's named in the deed? If they're married, the not present spouse will have to sign the contract if it is the homestead of either spouse and the divorce is not final yet. You can't believe how often this issue comes up last minute. Just came up again yesterday. They're at the closing, they're at the listing appointment, and the seller says, I'm not married. Well, come to find out they are married. There's a marriage certificate. And the title underwriter found it. And they have been estranged for 1,000,000 years, and the whole closing was derailed. And it could have been nipped in the bud at the listing appointment, and nobody wants to hear the things that are going to lead to a not commission. So some agents don't want to ask the hard questions. Corporate entity, if it's an LLC, you will need all the named managers. Pause, full stop. If it's an LLC, you're going to need all the named managers. Members cannot bind an LLC. Members own, managers manage. Members have no binding authority, and they're going to tell you, but I own this company. Unless you're a manager or you're an authorized member, you can't sign for the company. Sometimes you'll see LLCs with presidents, vice presidents, secretaries, treasurers. Technically, any one of those could be able to bind the LLC, but I've seen problems with partners and title underwriters. So practically speaking, get all the executives to sign, at least get the president or vice president. Okay, so this is under the topic of LLCs. Let's change the way that's worded a little bit. Where did my tools go? Get all the executives. Let's get all the managers. managers. Get all the managers to sign. For closing, we can get documents executed that'll authorize one of the managers to sign for the whole entity. But for the listing, get all the managers to sign. It's the easiest way to do it. As soon as you start getting documents, authorizations, that just gets tricky at the onset. If it's a corp or a corporation, or it's incorporated, you only need the single signature of the president or vice president, secretary, or treasurer. Directors cannot bind the company. Shareholders cannot bind the company. Shareholders equals owners. And members cannot bind the company. It's got to be the president or vice president. I think everybody knows that, but technically a secretary or a treasurer could do it. Generally speaking, owners, shareholders, members, and directors cannot bind the companies, although they may insist they can. If you see that the seller is a trust, if you see the word trust in the grantor or the grantee deed, so the person who was the buyer, if it's a trust, ultimately the seller will have to give the title agent a copy of the trust or key pages in the trust. Set expectations early. After they have signed the listing agreement, tell the seller this: I can't tell you how many deals this has stalled or even killed. We had one the other day where the seller insisted they weren't going to provide any pages to the trust. Well, you know what that means. Probably it was a nefarious, there was some bad intent, there was some not full disclosure, there was some people without authority, et cetera, et cetera. And so that deal didn't close. But had the agent said to the seller at the listing appointment, you're going to have to do this, that could have been headed off a lot earlier. Look at the deed, see if the trustee is named. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Land trusts and more exotic trusts almost never identify a trustee. It's going to get a little trickier, but those are conversations you're going to want to have early on. Who is the trustee? And we're going to have to get authorizations from them to close. Get a
Jim,
trust copy at the list. Go ahead.
my son is a probate litigator, and the stories that I hear
I can only imagine.
with nefarious trusts, deeds,
Yeah. And now with the popularity of YouTube and all these people saying nest the properties in trusts and do all these great things, and the title agent will never be able to figure out who you are. I hear these people when they're saying conceal the identity of the owner and the protection from liability. But you have the other side of that coin, and that is people showing up to sell properties that aren't the rightful owner. And if it's there's a certain balance, I want my name to be out there to the extent if some of my property is selling, somebody's calling me to say, hey, I'm selling your property. And if I'm not, I'm going to stand up and say, oh, no. And that's not always, I mean, a little thing like, we've talked about it before, Sunbiz. You know how the Sunbiz record has an EIN number in it? People are heisting the EIN numbers out of Sunbiz and using them for their own nefarious purposes. We had a woman that had $1 million worth of income, never sold a thing on Amazon in her life, and there was a company set up and used her EIN number. And so you want to make it easy for people to do business with you. If your EIN number is there, it makes doing a whole lot of things easier, but at the same time, it leaves you exposed to other things. I look at title the same way. You're going to have to take on a little exposure potentially for somebody to not be going around your back and selling property. And these things, you know, we in the business want to think, if somebody sells my property, it's really easy to unwind. If somebody sells my property that I didn't authorize, it's really easy to unwind. It is not. You've got a BFP, a bona fide purchaser for value.
Wow.
And those people have a right to that property. They're tough to unwind. Partnerships, limited partnerships, and more exotic partnerships or other entities, get the signature of whoever you have in front of you and research after the signing. These entities do not have to be filed at the state secretary's report, and they're not found on Sunbiz. If you call me, we can figure it out together. Bottom line, get the signature of whoever you have in front of you. Text me and we'll figure out if any other signatures are needed.
Yeah.
Don't make it an uphill at the listing appointment. We can figure it out afterwards. Get your listing appointment, get your listing agreement signed. Check title advance for mortgages. This is all part of your checklist. Here's a big one I see lately. Know the property use. It's easy to understand and listed on the property appraisers page. Don't list as a duplex if the property use code says single family. At the very bottom corner of your property appraiser's card in most municipalities, you're going to see a land use designation. And there's a zoning and there's a land use. The land use and the zoning can be inconsistent. You could be zoned flex or commercial, not commercial, but you could be zoned any number of ways. But if the land use says single family, do not list that property as a multifamily. Have that conversation with your client. We just had one the other day. Listed as a multifamily, was a single family. The lender finally figured that out and tanked the deal at the very end. And the seller then resold to somebody else for a lot less money. And once they know about that defect to the property, it's not like they can go and sell the property somewhere else under the defective status. In other words, they had been renting it out forever. They thought they had a they had a multifamily. I don't remember whether they had rental permits on all the units. I don't think they did, but regardless, you had relatively unsophisticated agents and a sophisticated lender, and the thing died on the lender's desk immediately. And the lender was brought in late. Know the structure of the property. Is it wood, cement? Set expectations early. Wood is extremely expensive to insure. I just saw a little wood structure that costs $6,000 a year to insure. What does the seller care about insurance? Because they're going to have a buyer and the buyer is going to care, and that hurts the value. That hurts the sale value. Know the flood hazard rating. This is becoming more and more frequent a thing. So Realtor.com has a flood hazard rating. Why does the seller care what the flood hazard rating is? They're leaving, same thing. You got to set expectations in your seller. If the flood hazard rating is bad, it's going to hurt the value. If the flood hazard rating is good compared to the properties around it. So the new Realtor.com flood hazard rating, the flood hazard rating is determinative of that one property. So you can have a property that's a 6 or a 2 or a 3 as far as a low flood hazard, and it can be right next to a property that's a 4, 5, or 6. That makes your property that much more attractive. And vice versa, if your property is a 6 and the properties around it are a 4, set expectations early. It's just like having a 1-car or 2-car garage. It's become that relevant. Walk the outside of the property and the inside of the property. Look for recent additions, improvements, disrepair, roof issues, and issues that could affect the boundaries, etc. Agents don't do this. It's such a valuable tool. The agents that have done this and have called me back and said, "Oh my gosh, you can't believe what I learned." just use a really critical eye. What you ask after the seller signs the listing agreement, now the uncomfy stuff that will pay off big time later, ask about getting the signatures that we talked about. Discuss the payoffs revealed in your title advance.
Yes.
You wanna talk enough about your title advance before the closing to distinguish yourself before the signing, I'm sorry. The listing appointment signing, the listing agreement signing. And then after you get it signed, now you want to start having those uncomfy discussions.
I want to add this. Like, I've won listings just because I had a title advance. They said, none of the other agents, that we've interviewed
Walked in with
had a
title.
title, had done this much in-depth work before meeting us. We didn't even know that we had, for instance, maybe this, some kind of crazy one that's obviously the MV Realty lien, which has been bouncing around all over.
Just had one this morning, another MV Realty lien.
Yeah.
Postponed the closing for a long time.
Yep.
Maybe inevitable, maybe forever.
Yep.
And we do follow-up calls with our buyers and sellers, and we'll even ask, what made you go with this agent? And they always say one of three things. The agent was super prepared and ahead of the ball. They were professional and spoke well, and they were extremely attentive. And quite often they'll mention the fact, what won the listing agreement, and they'll say the title advance. They were super prepared, including I'll ask, did they have a title advance? If they say yes, that's always part of what distinguished them. All right, so you might see in the title advance, there are some uncomfortable judgments, credit cards, things like that. We have workarounds, we have notices of homestead, things like that. We can publish. It puts the closing out another 50 days, but we can do all those things only if we know ahead of time. So if you guys are having a conversation, you've had your listing agreement signed, and you see on your title advance, there's a credit card judgment from Bank of America, you have that conversation, you set that expectation. And if it's their homestead, we can then immediately file a notice of homestead, so your closing won't get postponed, so they don't have to pay the money. So the way it works is, if it's your homestead and it's not a materialman or a mortgage holder, then you can file what's called a notice of homestead to the judgment creditor. Let's say it's a credit card company, and when the property sells, we won't have to pay off the credit card company.
Beautiful. I mean, imagine you seem like a hero if you're an agent and you know that information to your seller, which is.
I'll say it one more time. If it's their homestead and they have a creditor that shows up in the title advance, and it's not a mortgage person or a person who did improvements to the property, we can likely file a notice of homestead, and that creditor doesn't have to get paid in the sale of the property. Your title advance will also reveal issues the seller may not know about or know are liens that to be paid off at closing. Big one we're seeing, I'm just going to call this PACE. I don't see many Y green loans lately. PACE loans. Ryan mentioned the MV Realty lien. We just had one. What's today? Tuesday. We just had one. It was yesterday. And then PACE loans. We do hard money lending, and I thought PACE loans were infrequently out there. We're finding more and more PACE loans. Does everybody know what PACE loans are? Somebody speak up if they don't know what PACE loans are. We're finding more and more PACE loans out there. They are insidious. And I'm going to tell you something that's a little known fact. And if you guys ask this question 100 times and you get one affirmative response, I will be shocked. Did you know that PACE loans take senior lien position in a lien priority fight?
Wow.
So you have a first mortgage lender, let's say, puts up $500,000 purchase. First mortgage lender puts up 350 grand. Second mortgage lender puts up 50 grand. And they go out and get a PACE lien for their solar panels for another 50 or 75, or could be more, not likely more, but 75 grand. That $75,000 lien in a foreclosure jumps to first position.
Jeez. No, I mean, there's
In a house with short equity,
I know
that lien gets paid before the second mortgage lender, and then if there's anything over, and then the first mortgage lender. But you gotta like wrap your head around this stuff when you're having your conversation with your sellers. That could turn a property that the seller believes has plenty of equity into a short sale with the second or first mortgage lender, not the PACE lender, with the big lender. I had no idea until I started researching this stuff.
Jim, what is an MB Realty lien? Is this a real estate company that's putting liens on properties that they were involved in the transaction?
So what happens is you got a real estate agent who's involved with MV Realty, and they're driving around, whether they're scouting properties or coming home from a listing appointment, they see a depreciated, dilapidated property. They look at the public record. They see the seller's owned it for a long period of time and it's not in great repair, but it is owner occupied, like a homestead or something like that. And so they knock on the door and they say, hey, I'll give you $3,500, $5,000, $2,000, sometimes as little as $500 if I can have your listing in the future. Then they record a listing agreement that says when the property sells, I'm going to get 1% to 3%, sometimes more, usually 1% to 3%. And then Australia gets a phone call 5 years later, 10 years later, and they say, hey, Australia, we want to list our property. Can you list our property? You show up, you list the property, you do your dog and pony show, they love you, you find a buyer, you order title. A week before the closing, you get your title commitment and the MV Realty lien shows up, and now MV Realty collects a listing agent fee, and Australia is expecting a listing agent fee. So they're paying double selling fees.
Yep.
They haven't been,
It happened to me before title advance 3 years ago. And
I've never heard of that.
yeah,
yeah, I think there's 15,000 MV Realty liens in Florida, and the majority are in West Palm.
Oh, that's probably
It's
why.
9 or 15,000. I can't remember exactly what the number is, but it's a big number.
That's unbelievable.
The title advance will show off the notice to owners. Will reveal the notice to owners. They'll reveal home improvement loans that are tied to the title, equity lines of credit. How many sellers didn't know an equity line was a lien that had to be paid off at closing? I had a real estate agent did a showing on the island, on Singer Island, $1 million, million three sale or something, and the first and the second mortgage added up to plenty of money for there to be enough money for there to be equity in the property at the sale, but the equity line that is going to have to be paid in the sale, the seller just didn't know. And when I sent an unsolicited title advance to the agent, an agent I really want to do business with, and they said, oh my God, you just saved me so much time. And the seller didn't want to sell when they found out. And so the listing agent didn't burn a whole lot of effort on something that could never close, because the seller was never going to come to the table with money. Second and junior mortgages, judgments, a lot of times you have credit cards. That's the biggie that we see. Those have to be paid off at closing unless it's your homestead and we file a notice of homestead. And yes, the often fatal, always pesky, yep, MV Realty, perpetual listing agreements. Now, the state's attorneys general is all over MV Realty to get these things stricken, but it hasn't happened yet, to the best of my knowledge. It's June 3rd, 2025, hasn't happened yet. Ask the
Wow.
seller for a copy of the documents if there is an entity or a trust, or prepare them for the title agent to ask for this. So you got the listing agreement signed. Don't do this ahead of the agreement. After you get the agreement signed, ask for a copy of the trust, or let them know if they can't get it then and there, that it will be a requirement of the closing by the title company. Set expectations on price with regard to structure, insurance, land use, flood, all those things we talked about. That's what you're going to discuss further after the listing agreement is signed. Discuss the issues that you discovered in your walkthrough of the property. Ask the seller if there are any issues affecting value that we can't see. Remind them of the seller's disclosure duty in the contract. Nobody should ever get this wrong again. It's right in the contract. Seller knows of no facts. How can we do this better? Seller knows of no facts materially affecting value of the real property which are not readily observable and which have not been disclosed to the buyer except as provided in the proceeding. except as has been provided for in the proceed. Okay, so you just need to know this first sentence. Forget about the last little bit I left in there. 3 parts. Seller knows of no facts materially affecting value of the real property which are not readily observable. And you can think of it as easy as seller has knowledge of something that affects value. That should be somewhat self-explanatory, that a regular inspector will not discover in an inspection. Do regular inspectors move all the throw rugs? Do regular inspections, do they look inside of walls? Do they look for mold and things like that? No, they see whatever's on the surface. And if sellers have painted over things or sellers have tried to conceal things and they have knowledge of those things, those are going to be problems further down the road. So you have that conversation if you see stuff. And I had one the other day where the selling agent had the conversation with the seller after the listing agreement was signed about the recent paint on all the ceilings. Nothing was painted. The walls were grungy and everything was in relative, well-used disrepair, let's just say, lower price product house, but the ceilings were sparkling white. Stood out like a sore thumb. You have that conversation. Why are these ceilings so white when the walls are so dingy? There was leaks all over the place, and they, the roof had timed out. It had reached its service life, and instead of replacing the roof, they patched the roof, they painted over the ceilings, and that could potentially be a Johnson v. Davis issue. Is it typical that the inspector is going to get on the roof and do a thorough inspection of the roof shingles? I know inspectors that never get on the roof at all. So that's an issue that you'd want to have a discussion about. Sounds counterintuitive, but it is. Ask if all the permits were done with the permit and remind them of the seller's permit disclosure duty in the contract. The contract's your friend, right? Australia's showing up to do this listing appointment, and you're going to ask the question, but you're always going to bring them back to center, and it's the contract. And it's not a contract that's drafted against them. This is the standard contract that everybody signs. And this is what I tell my clients. This is the gold standard of contracts, and this is what everybody expects to find. This isn't drafted for or against buyers or sellers. It's completely neutral. But use that contract as your friend to get those disclosures out of your clients. Look for things that don't fit. Here's an easy one that I saw not too long ago. Older couple, rundown home with a brand new high quality hurricane impact windows. Or solar panels. Or AC, new AC. So these are the things that you want to have little triggers go off in your head, and you want to have those conversations. I didn't think solar was gaining any traction, but I've probably looked at 4 or 5 home transactions recently with PACE loans for solar panels. And to make matters worse, we probably have 3 cases in the office where contractors did shoddy solar panel installations that resulted in code violations.
Oh my goodness.
So you have an older couple that thinks they're going to put these solar panels on their house and make it so attractive for a buyer. Now there's a lien on their property where the solar panels might have cost 20 or 30,000, say $20,000 on the general market. Through your PACE loan, those solar panels are now $40,000. The selling agent for the PACE loan told the sellers, oh, these don't have to be paid off at closing. They're assumable, which they are. But there's no lender for the buyer who's ever going to allow them to be assumed, or any buyer who buys at a market value who wants to take on another $30,000 or $40,000 in debt. So now they have extremely expensive solar panels, and I've seen several recently. I've seen 3 or 4 recently where those solar panels weren't installed properly. And not only does the seller have bloated debt on inexpensive panels, they now have a code violation. And the code violation is racking fees at $20, at $200 a day.
Oh my goodness. We'll advise our sellers not to put on solar panels through PACE loans.
Through PACE loans. Multiple pictures of seller with the, okay, so the seller says, I'm single, but there's multiple pictures of the seller with the same person and kids, and the seller tells you they are single and the deed only has the seller's name. You may have a pending divorce. It's just the way it goes. If the seller bought the property before they were married, and the title's only in the seller's name, when the seller goes to sell, a lot of times there'll be the only name on the title, but then you walk around the house and there's pictures all over the house with what appears to be a significant other and kids. Ask the hard questions.
Jim, a question about the solar panels.
Yep,
Don't they need permits to install solar panels?
correct.
So is it because companies, they're just choosing companies that are doing it without permits and that's why it's a code violation?
No, so what happens in the last couple that I saw, they actually got the permits. Actually, I take that back. I have seen one recently without permits, and it came up at the sale. But the three others I can think of off the top of my head, they couldn't get the permit closed. So the solar company
Failed
did
the final inspection?
failed the final. So the solar company did the installation, they got the permit, they called the inspector out for the final inspection, and it failed. Typically it's the way, two things. The way the penetrations for the wires go into the house, which should be easy to fix, but the way the solar panels are attached to the roof. It didn't meet the standard that it had to meet, and the contractor basically leaves the job. I saw a terrible one the other day where they incurred the PACE loan for the solar panels and the solar company never did the install, but that's a whole nother issue. Failed finals. That's what it boils down to. If you sense a problem, sale, ask the hard questions. Does the seller have outstanding judgments or IRS liens? Is there a divorce unpaid? These things can kill the sale. You know, is the if it's a trust and there are multiple trustees, is everybody in line? And you're only getting the signature of one of them. Hugely important at the listing appointment. Ask the sellers, do they have a U.S. taxpayer ID? Do they have a U.S. Social Security number? The property should be listed as a FIRPTA, if so, and the new contract has all kinds of rules on FIRPTA disclosures, which are actually great for agents that know the rules. I should put that in there. I was so happy to see that stuff done that way. Inform the property should be listed as a FIRPTA sale. Inform the seller they will need to hire a FIRPTA agent, and the title agent will refer them to 3. It's actually, I should say, and refer them 3. I can get you guys, we have a FIRPTA outline. I can get you guys the FIRPTA names. And why did I say not the title agent? Because if you set the expectation at the listing appointment or shortly thereafter, maybe let the dust settle a little bit, because FIRPTA usually drops like a bombshell on a lot of sellers. Get them lined up, get them in line that they're going to have to go out and get their FIRPTA certificate. It's called an 8288. Send it to the title company ahead of time, long before the title company's involved. If it gets to us and they still haven't gotten it, yes, we can absolutely give them the referral. But in our FIRPTA outline, which is on our website, there's FIRPTA agents at the bottom who are great. And it's not that expensive. It just boils down to setting expectations. Everybody thinks FIRPTA is a tax. FIRPTA is not a tax. FIRPTA is a withholding, and then the seller has to apply for a tax return with a tax return.
We did a great webinar on that.
Yeah, I get a lot of calls, and then ironically enough, of a few FIRPTA contract closings. Get HOA contact info and confirm the number of the HOA in that community. There are many communities with nested and multiple HOAs. If you're not getting a title advance and your seller only cuts one HOA check, sometimes title does not know there are second or third HOAs until just prior to closing. Can't stress how important that is. It comes up over and over. These are all the little things that everybody has pain over. I'm giving you the benefit of everybody else's pain to make your life easier. But if we don't, you know, stick to the roadmap that other people have had speed bumps on, there's no value to us. If the property is rented, here's a biggie. If the property is rented and tenants shall survive the sale, obtain a copy of the lease and tell the seller about the seller's estoppel letter affidavits. So this is the old FAR bar. I'll have to change that. So although this particular provision hasn't changed, in the contract, it says specifically that the buyer, let's see. Copies of written leases shall be delivered to buyer all within 5 days of the effective date. If buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion that the leases or terms of the occupancy are not acceptable to the buyer, buyer may terminate this contract by delivery of written notice of such to election of seller within 5 days of the receipt of the above items by the seller, and buyer shall be refunded the deposits. Get all that stuff ahead of time, because I've seen sellers deliver the leases just prior to closing, and then the buyer has the 5-day right to tank the deal. And it happens. Get all that stuff lined up ahead of time. And tenant estoppel letters. Estoppel letters and seller's affidavit shall be provided pursuant to standard D, except that the tenant estoppel letters shall not be required on a seasonal or short-term rental. Let's see. Estoppel letters and seller's affidavit shall be provided. So at least 10 days prior to closing, the seller is going to furnish the buyer estoppel letters from the tenant and the occupant specifying the nature and duration of the occupancy, rental rates, advanced rents, and security deposits. These are called the estoppel letters. I can't tell you how many estoppel letters we have written for seller's agents just prior to the closing to satisfy the buyer. Don't let that stuff, let the seller know ahead of time. They're going to have to sign all these things. We can give you the forms and they can sign them. It just says, when was the last time they collected rent? What's the monthly rent and how much is in security? It's so easy to do. I see Australia nodding her head. It just comes up over and over and over, but it's in the contract. It's in the section 6 for the occupied properties, I think, and then it's at the very end of the contract in the 400 section where they talk about leases and lease information. If estoppel letters or seller's affidavit, if any, differ materially from seller's representations and leases provided pursuant to paragraph 6 of the tenants or if tenants failed or refused to confirm seller's affidavit, buyer may deliver written notice to seller within 5 days after the receipt of such information, but no later than 5 days prior to closing, to terminating this contract. How many agents don't even know that language is in there? Get your leases early, tell your seller they're gonna have to sign seller affidavits. Contact us if you need any estoppel letter. And this is actually in light of the condo situation. This will be coming up more and more because many of these people that are selling their condos aren't selling their condos because they're not making money. And now with the values falling, it's just going to become tighter and tighter and tighter. Contact us if you need any estoppel letter forms. We're happy to provide them, whether we are the agent or not. Ask the seller if they are buying another home, cha-ching. If the seller is buying, discuss portability values. We talked about that last week. So you can distinguish yourself as a superior agent. Here's an outline on the topic of portability. I'll put the outline in there for the FERPTA. Does seller need a contingency for purchase of a new home? There is a sale of buyer's property addendum, but no seller side addendum. Call me. We can provide a purchase of seller's property addendum. All those little things related to additional commission opportunities. And 1057. And as I've said in the past, you can write us in as the title agent. If you're representing the buyer, we would love to close for you and have 24/7 access to me. All right.
Wow. That was a lot. That was a lot for the show. That was incredible. A lot
That
of
was
great
1 hour.
I
Jammed it
know.
all in. When we start talking about this stuff, this is when people tend to glaze over, but this is the important stuff. You know, all these little trusts and entities and getting all the sellers who have to make the sale. There's a bunch of comments in the chat, Ryan. Were you monitoring those?
Yeah, I
Jim,
was.
thank you so much for the information. This was so informative. This is Carmen Bernard.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Carmen. Thank you for the props.
Yeah. Federico had a comment about, do not usually disclose if there's HOA litigations. Obviously that's relevant now too. And obviously, the big thing now is, if the condo hasn't done the mandated, structural integrity test and reserve study, of disclosing that as well. I mean, obviously that'll
Hey, I didn't even, I'm putting this outline together and it's from outlines from years past. You could have, we've done a whole show on just the condo stuff, so I'll put a condo link in here, but yeah, there's all, that there's a little obscure statements in there about handrails and lighting and SIRS, not so obscure.
one thing I want to add
I
too.
feel for you guys.
Well, one thing I want to add too, because we need to get him now too, is, because we need to furnish it to the buyer, is the flood disclosure. So you might as well get that you know, get that at some point as soon as you can too.
I'll put that in the outline.
I
Yeah,
know you got to get the flood disclosure now.
you
I
guys are
almost
gonna kill
forgot
me.
about it on a deal that I had. You got to get the flood disclosure now.
Why don't
Yeah.
they add that as one of the addendums on the contract?
I don't know.
Why isn't it why isn't it a checkbox? Why doesn't the contract have
Yeah.
a distinguish between closing agent and escrow agent? I mean, these are obvious things that we get hung up on all the time. Honestly, I forgot about the flood disclosure when I was making this outline.
Yep.
Why not make it a form when you're going through the contract and just check it off?
Yep. I know it should be in the contract, honestly. I don't know why.
I'm gonna add FERPTA. I'm gonna add the FERPTA link in here.
Yep. And everybody will be emailed this outline, so we'll have all these links too, because there's some great links from past shows that we had that are in here. The whole FERPTA thing is, we did a whole webinar on that itself. There's a lot of nuances that go into that, which I'm dealing with actually on a listing that I'll be having here soon. So,
And I'll
I'm
update.
not getting those emails for some reason
all right.
with the links for everything.
Jim,
I
do
don't
you
know,
have a
maybe it's
link?
going into my spam or something, but I have to then go to your website, your YouTube and look it up there, but I don't know why I'm not seeing them.
Jim, can you text me the outline right now and I'll put it in the chat so everybody has it, just so they can save it. Text it to me right now and I'll.
Let's see, what's the easiest way to do it? Listing checklist.
Yeah, just put it in the chat.
Yep. Chat. Paste. All right, there it is. There's the outline from today. And I'm going to make some updates, but as I make the updates, as long as you have the link, Australia, all the updates that I make after you download the link, you'll get the most recent outline update. You get all the updates.
That's great, Jim.
Tuesday.
Well, good job, buddy. I mean, good job, Jim. I know it's hard out right now, and to be the educated agent that knows the difference, especially all these nuances when you go into a listing appointment. I tell you, the one thing you can be like a hero is if you go with a title advance to the listing appointment. It's free. It's a total no-brainer. I use it now on every single listing appointment that I go to, and the sellers are always super impressed. And honestly, too, I use it even when I'm working with buyers and we're making an offer. It looks like we're going to really go for a property. I get a title advance there as well, that I have. I mean, it's free. It's a great service. I put a link in the chat to title advance, but it's a great service that Jim provides for us agents. And
super easy. You just go to title advance, click request a free title advance.
Yep.
That's it. I use it all the time.
Oh, awesome. Happy to hear.
Oh, yeah.
All right, you guys go. So what's your do loop after this? Send a mass email motivating your buyers, tell them about the economic conditions we're facing, and you want to be a buyer when no one wants to be a buyer. That's just, you want to swim against the current. When no one wants to be a buyer, that's when you want to be buying. And then the other thing is, especially if you've got people, like we've got people in the office, they've got kids, they're getting married, they're looking for new places. Now's the time to motivate those people to make those moves, make those commitments. And then the second thing is crossing for cystic fibrosis.
That's awesome, Jim.
Click there and click on the link and give, and yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Jim. Thank you, everybody. Good luck out there. Let's make some sales. Let's do it.